Welcome to the Deep Dive,
Emerald City Hockey's Seattle Kraken podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Deep Dive, Emerald City Hockey Seattle Kraken podcast. RJ, Kraken, they're doing all right now, right? And won two of their last three, kind of moving along, beat up on the Penguins again. That's something.
Yeah, they're picking up standings points, whether you like it or not, right? They are winning some games and they're winning some games at home. And I think that's a positive thing, right? I mean, we've had some fun times at Climate Pledge Arena recently because, tank or not, right? I think a win at home is always more fun than a loss.
It definitely is, and the way that they've been doing some of these wins as well has been a lot of fun to enjoy and see in person. And today they are not at home, RJ, but we can still all kind of watch the game together and maybe celebrate something during it. Maybe not with Connor McDavid's return in Edmonton there, but it is this month's live game commentary game over at patreon.com/Emerald City Hockey. If you want, you can sign up, you can join the Patreon, you can do the 7-day free trial, you can join us and the rest of the ECH community as we watch that game live. It's always a ton of fun. And, even for games like tonight, where there's going to be a lot of other stuff going on, we find ways of making it a good time. And hey, Kraken could really surprise us here, RJ.
Yeah, they could. I mean, if they can pull off a win tonight, that's going to be really fun to watch with everybody. But even if they don't, it's going to be a great time. And as much as I've enjoyed having all these home games, being at Climate Pledge Arena, getting to watch the games with you, I always enjoy the live commentary even more because it's me, it's you, and it's a bunch of our friends. It's the ECH community all getting to watch the game together, and just all the little comments that we kind of have to each other during those games at home. We get to share them with everybody. Things that don't rise to the level of tweeting it or putting it on the Discord. Just the little observations that not just we make, but everybody makes. Just feels like a more complete experience watching the game.
It does. No, they always end up being like the highlights of the month for everyone. So I'm looking forward to this one especially. And hey, look, Joey Daccord versus whatever goaltending the Edmonton Oilers are going to get means this game is going to be close. I feel like
exactly. Goaltending is the most important thing, as we will talk about plenty in this podcast. It makes any game winnable.
Yeah. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about the decor for the Kraken and kind of how they've been performing and then what that means for the goaltending that the Kraken have been getting and stuff like that in just a little bit. But of course, first, we got to thank our wonderful sponsor, the law offices of Rico Tessendor, for sponsoring the podcast, RJ. And now, you don't know this. Rico doesn't know this. Nobody knows this except for me and everybody who's listened to this podcast now. But Rico today is going to be sponsoring two segments, the podcast, Whoa. But then also a little history segment here, because last week I talked about the near collision that I had and how one of my first thoughts was to call Rico, right, if things had gone sideways. And when doing so, RJ, I referred to the freeways that I was on. I referred to the five as the five, five, if you're from Ohio State. And obviously we got comments about that, up in these parts, that's not how it's said, right? And so I was looking it up because obviously being from Southern California, I've gotten this from everyone everywhere in the world, right? Like Southern California is the only place that does this, where we say the 5, the 101, the 23, whatever freeway it is, we put the in front of it. And so for Rico's ad read here, I thought I'd throw in a little history lesson, because I was like, okay, why is it that Southern California does it that way? How can it then be skewed so that we're doing it the right way? And also, like, from a grammar standpoint, I feel like the kind of does belong there. And so I can start with that one, and then I'll get into the history of why Southern California puts the there. But from a grammar standpoint, it's kind of split. Like, it doesn't really seem like either one, like it really falls in one direction or another. However, I will point out that if you're talking about waterways, rivers, or canals, you do put the in front of any of them. And what are those if not humanity's first freeways and highways, RJ, as those were the main methods of transporting goods and services and people from one, region to another, other cities, other communities, other countries. I would argue that if riverways and waterways and canals have then highways and freeways should too, right?
Normally I'm on the other side of you with these arguments. We both did grow up in pretty similar places, and at the risk of us getting canceled, which I'm sure is going to happen here, I have to agree with you, Dylan.
Yes, yes, yes. I was genuinely curious about why does Southern California do this? Why are we the only place in the world that puts the in front of the freeways? Do you know the answer, RJ? Because I didn't until I researched it.
No, I don't know.
All right, so
Enlighten me.
it's because Southern California basically had America's first freeways. Like we were the first place to kind of do it, and there's lots of reasons for that. Like the history of LA and why it's built the way it is, and all of that is very long and outside the purview of this podcast. But just know that we had some of the first freeways in America, and when they were first built, they weren't numbered. They were named, right? The Hollywood Freeway, the Arroyo Seco Parkway, all of those kinds of things. They all had different names to them. They were not numbered. And so if, from a grammar standpoint, naming convention, if they're named like that, you would put the in front of it. And so that's how the first freeways were. And those were all established in like the 1930s is when a lot of these were constructed and kind of everything. And that was before the US had a standardized system for everything. That gets put into place in 1956 when President Dwight D. Eisenhower signs the Federal Aid Freeway Act. And yes, this is still a Kraken podcast, everybody. So 1956, Eisenhower signs that. It establishes the like numbered convention of this is how things are going to be. If you know, all the numbers start in the Southwest of the United States, all the low numbers and everything, and then they get bigger as they go to the East Coast because that's where all the freeways were. Because they're ours, darn it. Anyway, that doesn't become really a thing, though, in Southern California until the 70s. Like all the way through that, people still, for that 40 years, still refer to them by their names, not by the numbers. In the 70s, it starts shifting and they finally start calling them by their numbers. And so they just kind of brought the over to it because, for most of everybody's existence, it was still like the Hollywood Freeway instead of the 101. And that's just kind of how it all came together. And so that's why Southern California uses the. Now, I would argue as the city that kind of established the freeway as like a big deal thing, I should argue then that if we're saying then that should be the way that it's said, right? Like everybody else decided to drop that because you all wanted a simple number system. But, that's just because I guess the non-Southern California mind cannot comprehend taking 11 different freeways to get to Disneyland from one's house, RJ, and how that is the optimum route to shave like a whole hour off of morning commute traffic time.
I do enjoy this deeper dive into, I guess, the reasoning behind this. Although I will say I do like your explanation from a couple games ago a little bit more. We were joking with our buddy Charles from Circling Seattle Sports, who, of course, is on the other side of this debate. And he's like, what? It's I-5. Come on, Dylan. And you just look at him, you're like, I-5? No, I don't five.
I don't five.
So I just thought that was pretty funny. A funny line from you there when referring to the 5. And of course, I mean the 5 freeway, not the 5 as in the number of Seattleites still listening to this podcast.
I know. And thanks to the law offices of Rico Testador for kind of allowing this segment to happen, for me taking over their sponsorship spot to do that.
And I can assure you all that Rico's opinion on the naming for the freeway
probably
thing
not,
what to say,
not the
it's
same
whatever
here.
your opinion is. It's
Yes.
if you're listening, it's whatever your opinion is on.
Yes, this is definitely a me thing from Southern California. And while we hope none of you ever need his services, the odds say at some point someone out there will be involved in an accident, whether on the road like the 5 or at work or anywhere in between. And when you are, we hope you call Rico at 425-778-9800 or visit his website ricotessendor.com to schedule a free consultation. He's won millions of dollars for his clients and helped thousands of people in the greater Seattle area. And as a fellow member of the ECH community, we know he'll help you too. All right, so moving on from controversial topics, RJ, let's talk about the defensive core for the Seattle Kraken, something I'm sure we'll all agree on very easily as far as how everybody's been performing there, don't you think?
Yeah, no controversy there whatsoever.
No, certainly not on the level of the whole highway thing. The D-Corps, RJ, It's kind of interesting as we started digging into this, and really a lot of credit goes to the Discord for this. The other day they were talking about defensemen and different defensive metrics as it relates to the defensemen on the Seattle Kraken, and kind of how they were doing in this regard. A lot of that brought up by Zoe, so shout out Zoe for all the work there on the Discord, and it really got you and I thinking. And we did realize that, look, through a lot of the season, we focused a lot on the analytics around the forwards, and then also the eye test around the forwards and how they've been playing, or what sort of lines should the team be going with, all of that kind of stuff. And we've largely, I don't want to say ignored the defense, but we haven't put that same level of analysis into the defense. We just kind of take it for granted that Dunn and Lars are going to go out there and they're going to be their unit, and Montour is going to go out there on that second pairing and he's going to do his thing, and Riker Evans is learning the ropes and he's getting better, and Mahura's been solid as a near league minimum guy, as a sixth defenseman, all that kind of stuff. And we've just like I said, the forward conversation has taken up a lot of the space this year, and I think for good reason. But I do think it is time that we finally start digging into this defense, RJ. And I do think that, like I said earlier, the Kraken have won 2 of their last 3. They're looking maybe a little bit better. I don't know that the same could be said for the defense. There's, in all of these games, whether the Kraken are win or lose, there are just some stretches where, Joey Daccord, because he's been playing all of the games, is just having to really kind of bail out the defense in front of him. And I do think that needs to get talked about.
Yeah, definitely. And the blue line play has not been, I think, what you'd expect also, just given the amount of money that you're spending. And that's been, a theme of this team this year, right? Is you do spend the cap, you do spend top dollar, and especially on the blue line, I think the Kraken have spent top dollar and they haven't really gotten top dollar results. And I think it has become a little bit more apparent these last few games. Really, it's been highlighted and masked at the same time by how well Joey Daccord has played, because you don't have a ton of goals going in. I mean, you look at that Penguins game, right? The Kraken only allow 1 goal. That Caps game, they only allow 3. One of them's an empty netter. But in that Caps game, you allow 6 breakaways, including a 2-on-0. And Joey does a fantastic job of keeping those out of the net. But I think it does draw the attention a little bit more to the kind of defensive opportunities that you are allowing to the other team. And it's become consistent now. I think you look at the last stretch of 7-8 games, and the Kraken probably don't win any of them without elite goaltending.
No, I don't think they do. And so much of it from like an eye test standpoint, we'll obviously, get into the analytics and stuff here in a little bit. I've just been noticing so many of like the same kind of common problems persist now. And particularly in this last week, when kind of going back, knowing we were going to talk about this, going back and looking at those games. And you have, a couple kind of key issues that have been there a little bit from the beginning of the year. I would say the least big deal one for me, and this is certainly better than like if you were to go back to like year 1 Seattle Kraken, has been, defensemen having bad pinches in the offensive zone, right? Stepping up in the offensive zone, trying to keep a puck in the zone, trying to be part of the play, trying to get a cycle going, something like that. And then there's a turnover, whatever, change of possession. The other team starts going up the ice, and now you have an odd man rush opportunity. It still happens. It happens to everybody. I feel like it's kind of happening at maybe like a slightly higher rate to the Kraken than with other teams in the NHL, but not to the point where I'm like, oh, that is the problem that needs to get fixed here. But I do want to acknowledge it, because it is one of those things that, when it happens and it results in a goal against or in one of those odd man rush opportunities, it is, the first thing that's going to get called out on like a television broadcast, right? Is going to be like, well, look at the pinch here from so-and-so, and this is what allowed that odd man rush opportunity the other way. So I do want to mention that it is still happening, but I don't feel like it's been the biggest, issue for this defensive core here.
Yeah, I agree with you. Like, it has been a problem, but there are other priorities. You look at some of the better chances they've allowed, it hasn't been that, but it is still a problem.
Right. And so that gets us into the work in the defensive zone. And for me, RJ, I think the number one thing that I'm seeing, that I'm noticing, and that I think is, in part responsible for why Joey Daccord's goals saved above expected is so high, because these chances are being allowed to exist, is the poor net front defending. And it's the fact that right now, if you play the Kraken, there's going to be several times throughout prolonged offensive zone sequences where you're going to be able to have somebody either directly in front of Joey or just completely left unguarded, backside against Joey, somebody just kind of sitting there waiting to, put a goal in behind him. It just feels like right now the Kraken are really struggling to keep guys covered in that, 5 to 7 foot range around the crease. It just feels like every single game there's multiple instances of somebody just kind of standing there almost like it's a power play, just left completely unchecked.
Yeah, and we're seeing that again, like it's a power play, but at 5-on-5, and it's something that I think the Kraken actually did a better job of earlier in the season, especially kind of their shutdown defense. When I'm talking Jamie Alexiak, Adam Larson, and really just tying up their man net front, and we are seeing, I think, a bit of a lack of, whether it's focus there or willingness to really body up and take somebody completely out of the play, or just making the wrong read. I mean, I think of one of the goals. I'm trying to, find exactly which one it was. Might have been the Sabres game where it's a player that's standing in front of the net. Alexiak has him guarded and then chooses to kind of try and take away a backdoor play. But then the guy in front of the net just gets the tip and scores. And so it's those types of plays that I think we're seeing more often. And it's unfortunate too, because on a play like that, Joey Daccord is going to stop any shot that he can reasonably square up to the way he's playing right now.
Mm-hmm.
But any kind of tip, screens, net front stuff, that's going to take any goalie out of it.
Right. That's the one thing that they just can't deal with. And even on that play, because I know exactly the one you're talking about. Jamie Alexiak, right? Like, it's a problem that you have somebody both net front and
Zucker goal in the Buffalo game. There we go, found it.
And back door. Like, that's an issue, right? When your defenseman has to choose between, like, okay, split second, which is the lesser of two evils here. Like, that's just not a scenario in which your defense should kind of have to find themselves in. And I think that's been a big issue for them. So I feel like that's been a problem. I feel like as the season has gone on, like you talked about, it's gotten more of a problem. I feel like the defensemen are getting, and this is maybe where the forwards come in too, they're having to be more rangy in the defensive zone. They're having to go off into the corners a little bit more. I know that that's the defensive system that they're running. They are running a zone defensive system that would have, your D1 be the primary, pressurer of the puck carrier if it's kind of out, down in the bottom half of the offensive zone, certainly anything below the goal line. So you're only going to have one defenseman then left out front. You're supposed to then have, the forwards there to kind of help, right? Weak side wingers should be there, situations like that. And the forward play in the defensive zone hasn't necessarily been great this year. I think that's a lot of why we find the Kraken stuck in their own zone, is because just kind of nobody can get the puck out of the zone. Like, whether it's defense or forwards, everybody's just having difficulties clearing the puck and trying to get things going. But it's really one of those things where if I wonder if the Kraken kind of have to rethink their defensive system right now, because I just don't know that you can afford to play with one of your defensemen being so rangy, being somebody who is going to have to go off into the corners and try to really pressure the puck carrier.
Right. And it seems like whoever that is, the other defenseman isn't really able to kind of think quickly enough and adjust. And we're seeing that consistently where gaps are opening up because of that. And I do wonder if that's something you need to kind of reconsider, because again, you're consistently getting these chances and Joey Daccord is bailing you out on a lot of them, but he can't, theoretically can't do that forever. Right.
Right. And we've seen, like, at different times, the Kraken maybe shift things for a game or two here or there. I think about that Utah game, and they played a lot more of like just a kind of stay at home, collapse into the center of the ice style defense, keep the hockey team to the perimeter, the potential Yetis, if they can get past the government trademark office there. And I, it's not the ideal way to play defense. Like, it is something that teams with bad defenses kind of resort to. I think of, like, Montreal is really doing a lot of this year, where it's just kind of everybody collapses in the defensive zone. You're just really focused on taking away those high danger chances. And, if we can just keep other teams to lower danger, shots from the point, stuff like that, then hopefully we can, outscore whatever issue we have in the defensive zone. And I would have said that the Kraken don't need to do that, but I'm kind of maybe getting to the point where maybe the Kraken need to consider playing that way.
At least against teams that maybe don't have the firepower in zone to make you pay for that. Like tonight against the Oilers, I would recommend you don't do that
Yeah.
just because you let McDavid and Draisaitl circle around in the zone. You let Hyman get net front. Bouchard launch from the bombs from the point. They're going to score on you plenty. Also, it relies a ton on your transition game, right? You're going to be
Yes.
defending. You're going to be in your own zone for most of the game. But if you can make the other team pay on those transition chances, just like they were able to against Utah, that sort of thing can work. And but against a team like say Edmonton, probably not going to work. But the next couple games, Anaheim, San Jose, maybe you can make that work, and maybe you can prevent some of the things like again the last game against San Jose, where that 8-5 game where they're able to kind of get those rush chances on you, right? You can prevent that sort of thing at least. So it might be an adjustment to make after tonight.
Yes. No, I'm with you there. And like I said, it's not the ideal way of playing defense. There's a reason that the only teams playing that way are the teams that kind of know they are poor defensive teams. But it's a way of kind of, you're definitely capping your upside, but you're shoring up your floor there. And it feels like the Kraken might be kind of at that point, unfortunately. Given that they're playing that way in the defensive zone, RJ, it wasn't totally surprising when we went and we looked at the numbers for the defensemen that, from an analytics standpoint, they're not great, right? There is nobody on this team that has an expected goal share above at 47, even 47%. Like that is above every single member of the Kraken defense this year. That's tough to overcome if you're this team. Now, looking at the forwards, you only have two forwards that have played, I think, with any sort of consistency over 50%. They're barely over 50% for you. So this is still like a team-wide issue. Other teams are just able to generate more chances, higher quality chances than what the Kraken are able to do this year. That's not totally surprising after watching all of the games that they've played, but it is one where it's, you would expect, or you would hope, given especially some of the contracts you have on this blue line, that you would be able to get, somebody closer to 50%, even just one of them.
Yeah, and so when we were looking at this individually, because we know it's kind of a whole group problem with the decor because all their numbers are bad. We were looking at it individually, and you almost have to grade on a bit of a curve just because nobody's numbers look all that good on this blue line. And so, I was looking at the Athletics player cards that they have, that Dom Lucian works on, and the highest, the player who's doing the best, Vince Dunn, net rating of like 0. Actually, I have Montour and Evans here with a +1, so they're just ahead of Dunn on the current net rating. But they also have like a player value thing on there as well that talks about market value based on how they're playing and how the numbers say they're playing. And for Vince Dunn, I think he has the highest on the team at 5.3 million, and that's significantly less than his contract, and it's not very good. And watching Vince Dunn, we can see that is better than a $5.3 million player. I think there's some, some things that model, for the Athletic doesn't really tell you, but still, when that's the top guy on the team, it shows just kind of how depressed everybody's numbers are. And it makes it a little harder, I think, to judge individually, but you can, I think, parse out some differences between certain guys and maybe try and identify, okay, who is the problem, who's not, because I think, there are different levels of that.
Yes, no, there definitely are. And we can start with Vince Dunn because Vince Dunn's arguably the most fascinating case in all of this as we dig into the numbers. He does, have the best expected goal share of any Kraken defenseman. It is at 46.91 at 5-on-5. That's, it's solid. Like I said, you want it better, but that is solid given the overall state of this Kraken team. What's interesting though is, and again, credit to Zoe for pointing this out on the Discord the other day. If you look at rates, RJ, so on a per 60 basis, and you look at not expected goals for and against, but actual goals for and goals against, and you look at Vince Dunn compared to the rest of the NHL, RJ, Vince Dunn is, worst in the league as far as goals against per 60 amongst defensemen at 5-on-5 that have played 525 minutes. So anybody who's played as much as him, that's 170 defensemen in the National Hockey League. Vince Dunn is, leads them in goals against per 60 at 3.87. Now, his expected goals against per 60 is 2.7. So that's a significant gap between what should be happening when Vince Dunn is out there versus what's actually happening when Vince Dunn's out there. So already that's a little bit of like a mystery you kind of have to try to figure out, is just how is it that teams are scoring at a significantly higher rate than what they should be when Vince Dunn's out there. Compounding that mystery is a secondary mystery, RJ, and that just makes the larger mystery larger. And that is that if you look at actual goals for per 60, Vince Dunn is second in the league as far as most goals for per 60, behind only Dougie Hamilton, and he's just barely below Dougie Hamilton there. And that's with 3.3 actual goals for per 60 against an expected goals for per 60 of 2.339. So again, a massive gap between what should be happening when Vince Dunn's out there versus what's actually happening. And I did like the line of, is Vince Dunn the Chandler Stevenson of defensemen? Because just like with Chandler Stevenson, where everything seems to happen when he's out there, goals are just scored both for and against at a much higher rate. Vince Dunn is that way, right? Goals are being scored when Vince Dunn is on the ice at a much higher rate than they should be in theory, RJ, both for and against. Like this is something that's just happening. And I find that really interesting because that's just not something you see very often.
It's not, and these numbers are really high. I mean, and I think the per 60 rate can help everybody put this into perspective, right? I mean, if you take one hockey game at 5-on-5 the whole time and just the average game, right? And that's a 3.3 to 3.87. I know fractional goals don't exist, but that's a 3 to 4 hockey game for 60 minutes on the ice while Vince Dunn is out there. That's pretty high scoring for, one of the top defensemen both ways.
Yeah.
And so, and I think the expected goals of, 2.7 to 2.39, that's kind of more what you'd expect to see. That's more of an average hockey game. But it really does highlight how much is going on when Vince Dunn is on the ice. I mean, to make a really obscure like Horsey books reference, but everything happens so much when Vince Dunn is on the ice. And I think it's interesting to look into why. I mean, Dylan, do you have any theories?
I do have one theory, and this is, I don't know that there's like the numbers to back it up. Like this is me trying to explain the numbers based off of, knowing Vince Dunn's play style, knowing how important he is to this team and all of that. And that is that it does kind of make sense that things would maybe be above the expected goal mark. Again, this is a very large gap to try to explain, so I don't know how much of that is this. But I can understand that given the season the Kraken are having, RJ, I can understand Vince Dunn trying, and this is just clear if you watch any of these games, he's trying to do a lot. He's trying to make up for a lot of the deficiencies elsewhere in this lineup. And so I think in the offensive zone, Vince Dunn is trying to get involved in plays more. He's stepping up in the offensive zone more. He is pinching more. And that does lead to more chances for the Kraken. It does lead to more goals for the Kraken because he's that good, right? He is arguably their best player, and he's certainly a great player in the offensive zone. So I think that's where maybe you're seeing the higher actual goals for number over the expected, is because he is contributing in the offensive zone a little bit more. And if he's able to have that result in actual production, if you do that over a large enough sample size, I just think because of the way expected goals are measured, you could slowly start building that gap. It's a very large gap. Maybe this that explains it. I also think defensively, that's kind of what's going on. Like I said earlier, Kraken really struggle to get pucks out of their zone. They really struggle to get the puck up the ice. They really struggle when they get kind of, hemmed in their own zone and they just can't find a way to break out. They're having difficulties chasing the puck. They're doing all of these things. Vince Dunn is one of the guys that I feel like he had, really become, like last year, a really solid net front defender, somebody that was very good in that role. Because the Kraken have struggled so much to get those breakouts, I do think that he is becoming more rangy in the defensive zone. He's leaving that net front area to go out there and try to get pucks up the ice, try to create those chances, try to help out his team, try to bail out the forwards, whatever it is. And I think that that's then leaving more and more of those players net front available, open, whatever. And that's resulting in those additional goals against that are actually occurring. And again, if that many more goals are actually occurring, then, than what should happen on paper, or those chances, if those chances actually become a goal, then that's a 1, and anything unexpected is going to be less than a 1, because like it's never a full expected goal any chance, really, right? So like that's kind of in my mind vaguely how I'm trying to make up this mysterious gap, both offensively and defensively.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably at least part of it to explain that, right? For that gap. And I mean, I think of just the plays that I can remember where Dunn and Larson have been on the ice for goals against, and it just also feels like the Kraken just haven't had the opportunity to play as much with the puck. It feels like they've had to do a lot of defending, and that's really
Yeah.
not their forte, right? Is spending time in their D zone. That's a D pair that you, especially Vince Dunn, that you want in the offensive zone. And I think Adam Larson just also hasn't done when Vince Dunn does get rangy and leave Adam Larson with a player or a player and a half, on average, right in front of the net to kind of deal with. I don't think Larson has been able to do as good a job dealing with that as he has in the past. And so that can kind of just compound things and make things worse. Also like sorting out rushes and whatnot too. I mean, I think of that Detroit game. I think
Mhm.
two of those goals were Dunn and Larson just cannot sort. There's two players they need to deal with. They just don't sort out the two players and somebody's kind of wide open. I feel like we're seeing a little bit less in terms of the, I mean, I hate to say it, like in terms of the chemistry there, just that
Yeah.
unspoken communication. I don't know that that explains, the expected goals to actual goals thing, but I think it might explain why everything is happening so much, really, in an expected and real terms. Is just that when they are able to play offense, we see that Vince Dunn's still an offensive difference maker. That can just be seen when you're watching the game, and he is contributing. But defensively, just they're having to defend more, and they're not very good at it.
Yes, and the high danger chances are up for this group. If you look at like maybe for Vince Dunn again, some of this could be explained. His on ice save percentage is actually really low. It's 86.67. Like that's not very high. So maybe some of this is just bad luck as far as goalies being able to make a save when Vince Dunn's out there. But yeah, for me, a lot of it with Vince Dunn just feels like stuff is happening because Vince Dunn's trying to do too much, both in the offensive zone and the defensive zone. And frankly, the Kraken need him to be doing too much. Like they do need him to be playing this way. I think that is better for them, just given kind of the struggles of the rest of the roster. But it's one where if Vince Dunn is trying to do all of this, it means that yes, he's going to score more. He's going to help you score more. But you're going to see those mistakes in the defensive zone too. You're going to see those opportunities in the defensive zone because he is really trying to be a one-man team out there to some extent, and you just can't do that without it turning into high event. Like there's just no way that you can make that work.
Yeah, I mean, that is kind of how it works. And you're right, he's trying to do too much, but I don't know that he has. I don't know. Does he have other options? Like, I feel like if he doesn't
No.
approach it that way, less happens overall. But I don't know that it really makes the Kraken any better.
I mean, maybe if he, like I said, if you as a team try to simplify things defensively, and you're just
It has to
like,
be a whole team buy-in
yeah,
thing where we're all going to play this
right,
way.
then maybe you can have him have that same attitude in the offensive zone. Like feel free to pinch up in the offensive zone. Feel free to join, cycles, all that kind of stuff there. But no, in the defensive zone, you don't kind of have to be Superman. You don't have to be the guy that's going to try to get that breakout every single time, because as a team, we're keeping you closer to home. The forwards are going to be collapsed in a little bit more. They're going to be trying to be the ones that are really trying to focus on getting that puck out of the zone. That would be a way of doing that where you can maybe, keep that better than it's supposed to be offensive side of Vince Dunn while trying to limit that worse than it's supposed to be defensive side of things, which is really what these numbers are saying.
Yeah, no, I think that's, I mean, ideally what you try to do. I mean, I don't want to go on to talking about the forwards because it's really about the blue line, but I think one thing that just has to be blanket mentioned, no matter when we're talking about any of these defensemen, especially defensively, is that the defensive play from the forwards this season has not been good. I know we've talked about
Yeah.
that in the past, but just something worth mentioning in the
No,
overall context.
that was one of my like in summary things after we talked about everybody, but yeah, we could definitely mention it now. I really do think that that's a large part of this is like zone defense is what good teams run, right? Like that's what you're seeing in the Stanley Cup Finals last year from both teams. Like the style of zone defense that the coaching staff wanted to implement this year is the like system of defense for just about every top team in this league. It's just been that it does rely on your forwards to contribute defensively because you are taking one of your defensemen kind of so far away from the net. And so you really do have to rely on your forwards kind of helping make, pick up that slack in the center of the ice. And we just have not seen that from the Kraken this year. It's also one where you really rely, as that defenseman is pressuring the forward, you're really relying on your center or your F1 to really back them up so that as they pressure the forward, that F1 can just grab the puck and get it moved up out of the zone. And, Matty Beniers has done a fairly good job of that this year as a center. I don't know that any of the other centers have really done that. Yanni Gourde did a decent job, but obviously he hasn't been around for a little while now. We don't know when he'll be back. That's, to me, is where a lot of this kind of comes from, is if you're going to go tie up somebody in a board battle, you need that secondary player in there to collect the puck. And that's really been missing this year from the forward group, whether it's the centers, whether it's the wingers. I think that's been a big issue for them. I do think, though, that's why we're seeing this Matty Beniers line with Kaapo Kakko and Jaden Schwartz work. They're always there, right? Like, those are your forwards that are kind of going to be the most consistent as far as going and getting the puck. And I can just think of multiple examples from these last couple games where, even though they haven't been contributing that much offensively, they've maybe cooled off a little bit there in the Washington and Pittsburgh games. Just thinking about them defensively, Jaden Schwartz as a strong side winger is absolutely going to come down and try to, dig the puck out of a board battle and move it up the ice. Matty Beniers is always going to be there to support his defenseman. Kaapo Kakko, same thing. They've been able to really get a lot of like controlled zone entries or get the puck up the ice and out of the defensive zone. And I think it's just because they are just better than anybody else on the team at doing that, at providing that secondary support and knowing what to do in that scenario. I just think the other lines have really struggled with that in this defensive system.
Yeah, I mean, they really don't have the forwards for that system. Okay, I guess they do, but not enough of them, and they're
They
all
don't
kind
have
of
enough,
stacked
yeah.
on that one line. Oh, they're
They
all on
are.
that one line, and so any other time you have the other forwards out there, it's not going to work well. And so, I mean, I guess that also begs the question of, well, what do you? And maybe we don't. It's not time to get to this yet, but what do you do about that going forward? Because this season, there's only so much you can change about the personnel that you have. We talked about maybe adjusting the defensive system to just kind of stop the bleeding here
Mm-hmm.
and collapse in a little bit more. But this is a big question the Kraken are going to face at the trade deadline in this offseason is, what do you do about that personnel wise?
Right. It is a tough one. Like, it's a tough one. You've committed a lot of money in term to some guys that really do struggle with that, right? Whether it's down the middle as a center and providing that secondary support and really knowing what to do with that. Like, we've seen lots of plays from a center on this team that he can go in and dig out the puck and get it, but then we'll see turnovers in the defensive zone, right? Like, getting the puck then out of the zone becomes the problem for him. And that's an issue that you've got to figure out. And then there's other examples of, when we talk about all of these players being left net front, or we talk about situations like that one goal with Jamie Alexiak, where he's got to choose between player net front versus player backside, where do I go? That's where your weak side winger is supposed to be helping you out. Weak side winger is supposed to be covering the slot. They should be there to take one of those players, right? To take that player. And I just don't know that enough of the wingers on this team kind of, play that style of defense, are used to thinking that way, used to having their head on a swivel and finding those open players, even if they are a little bit closer to the crease, and knowing to drop down and kind of take them away. And I think that has put a lot of strain on this defense. Moving kind of away from Vince Dunn, because Vince Dunn's like a whole enigma. Kind of feels like he's trying to do too much. Maybe that's an explanation there. We've got his D partner, Adam Larson, or maybe we should say D partner for now, because I think we're all kind of maybe ready to see this broken up a little bit, RJ.
I mean, you were there last game. You turned to
was.
me and said, okay, I've seen enough. Need to break up Dunn Larson. And when you get to that point, I feel like it's serious.
Yeah, and some of it is not because, like, oh, I think they're playing poorly together. It's more of just like, that would be the biggest wake up call that I feel like a coaching staff could send to this defensive unit right now, is to take the pairing that has felt the most, change has been the most off the table for now two coaching staffs, and to say, no, we're going to break that up. And not because one of them's injured. Obviously, we've seen that plenty, more than we want to. but to break them up, I feel like would be the thing that you could do to send the biggest message to this defensive unit that like, hey, the play in the defensive zone has to step up, is to break up those two guys. And so that's kind of more so why I'm in favor of it.
Yeah, and I'm in favor of the idea of it. Like you look at their performance recently, and I just think, yeah, you should probably break this up. Of course, the question ends up being, and we were asked this on post game, and it's a very logical next question, which is, okay, you break them up. What does that look like on the blue line? And just looking at this group of defensemen, there isn't really a clean way to put it back together if you do break that pair up, I feel like.
There really isn't. Yeah, that becomes the problem that you've got to then kind of figure out if you're the Kraken. I don't know the best way of doing that off the top of my head. Like, ideally, the Kraken have the perfect setup. You have 3 puck moving defensemen. You've got 3 guys that can play in the defensive zone. Just pair them up, right? One with one.
Yeah.
Like, that's all you kind of have to do. The problem is, no matter what the groupings have been so far this season, they haven't looked great. And so I don't know that there is like kind of some magic combination of these 6 guys that's going to really kind of turn things around for you there. I guess if you look at like which pairings have been the most successful this season from like an expected goals percentage, because again, defense is really hard to quantify with numbers. So like we're kind of using this as like the best thing we've got. Evans Mahura has actually been your best. It's more of a limited sample size, only 17 games together, only 118 minutes together at 5-on-5.
And I'm sure less quality competition as well.
And definitely less quality competition, but they have been your best there. Alexiak Montour is then the next unit, and then you got Dunn Larson. Like, there is really no combination of when you've moved the other guys around that has produced as good as those, which is a little scary because we know that they haven't been that great. And again, these are all pairings where you're sub 50% as far as being able to generate, or out generate chances from the other team. So I don't know. I think you can just kind of shuffle it, maybe move Evans up the lineup. But that's the best I've got, right? Like,
right, because I think we're both in support of keeping Evans Montour together for the time being, because they've been all right. I mean,
they've struggled though.
To break them up if you need to. I don't know. I think it's something they want to at least give a longer look, just to see what they have in that pair. I know Dan's talked about wanting to go with that D pair to kind of counter other teams' speed. I don't know how well that's really happened in practice, but he seems to like it. I mean, I guess, okay, if you're not afraid to break that up, like what do you, because here's the thing, you have 3 puck movers, you have 3 kind of, more defensive guys, but the handedness and the sides also complicates things.
Yes.
Like you could think, okay, well, let's just try like a Montour Larson, right? Because that's okay, defensive guy with puck mover, but they're both play on the right side. They're both righties, and that's not ideal. You could go, I don't know what, like, Evans, Alexiak Evans or something, but yeah, and Evans can play the right side. So Evans is gives you a little bit more flexibility, but it's not really a clean way to do this.
No, there isn't. And that's part of the problem.
It is. And so I think that's something that looking on a next, and we're both just kind of like, we don't know what else to say.
Easy.
We're kind of confused about this, but I think it does point to, and I don't know if we're ready to kind of make this point, because we could go down individually and just talk about all the different guys. But like my main takeaway from all of this is as you go past this season, looking at the trade deadline and the off season, I think the Kraken should be taking calls on every single one of their defensemen. Don't necessarily move all of them, of course, but I think you should be open to moving every single one of your defensemen that you have, just because this blue line, there's only really one way that's kind of configured to work pairings wise. We're seeing that it's not working in practice. Part of that's the forwards, but we're just seeing this entire group isn't getting the results you want. And I was looking at the contract projections. AFP Analytics just put out their contract projections. And of course, Riker Evans, a pending RFA, he's going to need a new deal. And if it's a long-term deal, that looks like, I think, 6 years at $5 million. And I think we both agreed that that's actually a pretty good price. Like, I sign that today if I'm the Kraken, right? And so if he's being paid $5 million, the Kraken they're tracking to have a blue line that is top 5 most expensive. I believe right now it's number 2 if the Evans signs that deal for next season, right? You have one of the most expensive groups of defensemen in the league. And you are getting, near bottom results from that blue line, you have to look to make a change there, especially because that's all resources that you can't devote to fixing a forward group that desperately, desperately needs to be fixed. So, I would look at maybe if you can get a real star player, impact play forward coming back, maybe move a Vince Dunn. I would look to. This is all going to be very unpopular, I'm sure, as I'm just listing this out. But I'd look to maybe try and get out of that Adam Larson contract now if you can, because he's now signed this extension. And I mean, with him too. I mean, you talked about his numbers a little bit, but you look at the more advanced numbers and like his JFresh player card. He's in the 8th percentile in war. He's on the evolving hockey, he's 2nd percentile in the whole league. Like
Mhm.
that's out of 100. That's not
Yeah.
very good. I might look to get out of that contract if I can. Alexiak has 1 more year left on his deal. He's someone who you might look to move just because of he doesn't have a whole lot of term. And is he really going to be part of the solution long term given his age? Maybe not. I mean, I hate to say it, but like, heck, even a Brandon Montour, if he'd want to go somewhere or whatever, he's playing fine. He's doing well. We've talked about how much we like him, but the whole idea of signing him to that 7-year deal, right, is that he's going to help you now. He's going to help you for a playoff push right now. And then maybe the back end of that contract ages a little bit poorly. But if we're looking at this team and thinking, okay, this is realistically maybe kind of 2 to 3 years before you're really going for it, you're kind of only getting the tail end of that deal when you're in position to use it most. And so I don't know. I'd kind of look at all of these guys. I mean, Riker Evans probably the least of all, but
Yeah.
if he's the piece to go get a star forward, then you can't have anybody be untouchable. I don't know. Do you agree? Do you disagree?
No, I do largely agree. Riker Evans has been your most consistent player this year as far as being, I guess, the best as far as giving you consistent, like, positive value. And even still, right, like I said earlier, none of these guys are technically giving you positive goal share, right? Like but that's again compounded by the forward group that's also not doing that for you. But I do feel like Riker Evans has been the guy that has stood out the most positively this season. I think that their teams overvalue defensemen all the time. I think Will Borgen is a good example of that, not to make more enemies of anybody listening to this podcast.
Well, congrats to Will Borgen, though, on signing that
Yes.
extension. I'm just happy for him. Like,
Right.
just getting to cover him for so long. I'm just happy that he signs a 5-year extension in New York, $4.1 million a year. Like, that's the payday he wanted, I'm sure. That's the security he wanted. So just happy for Will Borgen. But anyway, go ahead, talk about how it's such a bad deal for the Rangers.
Well, it was a bad deal for the Rangers, but even just looking at his numbers with the Kraken, he was by far and away the Kraken's worst defenseman out of this group. You're talking about expected goal share of 41.17, actual goal share of 33.33, right? Like things were really, really rough when Will Borgen was out there. He's part of, some of your worst pairings on the defensive side of things. If you look at the pairings expected goal share and all of that stuff, and you were still able to turn him on an expiring deal at the time into Capo Caco. Right? Like, yeah, you had to give a mid-round pick and whatever to help make it happen. But like, you were literally able to do that because teams just overvalue defensemen, particularly defensemen that they perceive as defensive guys, physical presences, right? Will Borgen kind of checks those boxes. So I do think that, yes, if a team wants to trade for an Adam Larson and take on that contract, you should consider it. If they want to trade for a Jamie Alexiak, who's only got 1 year left on his deal, but again, just kind of maybe provides you more flexibility, I think you have to be open to it. I think with the puck movers, it has to be more of like the right scenario to move somebody like Vince Dunn. Again, if you're getting a really good, solid young player, young forward back that is that kind of borderline star potential, just the way Vince Dunn has that kind of borderline star potential, I think you probably make that swap because it's more important for you right now, given where this team is, to have that up front than it is to have that on the blue line. You'd still have a Brandon Montour who kind of fills in that role. You still have Riker Evans, who's developing and has played with the puck very strong this season. It makes Vince Dunn expendable in that specific scenario. I would not trade him just for anybody. I wouldn't trade him for draft picks or even prospects that haven't shown it at the NHL level yet. But if somebody out there needs to trade their 25-year-old forward who has produced, 65 plus points at the NHL level, 70 points at the NHL level, again, the bar's a little low for the Kraken. That would be a lot for this group. I would consider it, and I think that the Kraken have to consider it in that scenario. But otherwise, with a Larson or an Alexiak, not only does it free up cap space, it frees up a little bit more flexibility on the blue line. And I think that those are the kinds of guys that other general managers tend to overvalue, and maybe even Ron Francis too, just given the the Larson extension and kind of what he's
Yeah.
given them.
Right. And I think these are guys you could certainly move for something of value. And I mean, the whole idea too behind like having a Riker Evans, and we're finally starting to see this develop for the Kraken, which again, through no fault of their own, they're just literally a newer organization, right? They've only had so many draft classes where now you're starting to see guys like Riker Evans able to come up and play 20 minutes a night and be real pieces of the blue line there. And what that allows you to do is sign them for, like, say that 6x5 deal and have them actually be cheaper than an aging veteran like Adam Larson, and be able to kind of move out those aging pieces of the blue line, bring in those guys on their second contracts where you still have team control that are just cheaper. And this is generally how competitive teams are able to be built. And it's kind of what Ron Francis is banking on with the Kraken, particularly with the forward group, is being able to kind of replace some of the more expensive guys with younger guys coming up on ELCs, on second deals. And that's how you get the most value out of players. And so I think we're just starting to see the very beginning of that with draft picks coming up. But that's what a player like Riker Evans allows you to do, is create more flexibility on the blue line. But you have to be willing to move the vets to create the space. And so I just hope that's something the Kraken are willing to do in the offseason.
Yeah, we'll see. And then the other thing that's been interesting, because we don't really need to go through everybody's numbers. Like Vince Dunn's the one that has the most kind of going on and needs to be broken down the most. And even still, it leaves a lot of questions unanswered. Like I said earlier, everybody's numbers are rough on this blue line. The eye test is the same with just about everybody, right? Like it is just in a bad way right now defensively. But one of the conclusions that I can draw, besides the fact that I feel like the forward group is really kind of not pulling their weight defensively, and that's taking a toll on the defense, it's also just like, does this mean that Joey is also just like even that much better than we've already been talking about with Joey? Because Joey is able to put together, great performances behind this blue line. He's able to have extremely solid stats behind this blue line, right? Like, and with the way the blue line is playing, RJ, you could say like, okay, well, with the expected goals, goals saved above expected that Joey has had, they're giving him a lot of very high chance, expected goal scenarios. Maybe they're feeding into that number a little bit. But even just looking at a more traditional number, just the 917 save percentage being behind a blue line where, nobody has good, like positive goal share, and the goal share numbers are as low as they are, and the defensive pairing numbers are as poor as they are. That to me is just really impressive. And I think it's one of those ones where, we're appreciating it a lot from an eye test standpoint, that Joey's making all of these big saves. He's the best goalie in those kind of 2-on-0 scenarios, all of that kind of stuff. But the numbers kind of drive it home all over again.
Yeah, they really, really do. Joey Daccord has been fantastic. And it feels like we talk about it every single game. We've talked about it the last couple podcasts, just how good Joey Daccord is. But this is game in, game out. And the worse that this blue line plays, feels like the better that Joey plays, just to step up and really help everybody out. And so, I mean, I'm kind of running out of words for this, but even you look at the last game against Pittsburgh, and I think it's worth talking about too, because and I think it's a question that maybe a lot of listeners to this podcast might have, especially if you're, kind of hoping for more optimistic stuff, but you've made it this far and you're thinking, okay, the Kraken have won 3 of their last 4. They've won 4 of their last 6. Why are we talking in such a negative way? Why is this whole podcast talking about how bad the blue line has been? Why aren't we talking about how great it is that they've turned things around a little bit? They've won 3 of their last 4, all that. But it's because when watching the games, we can see how pretty thoroughly the Kraken are being outplayed in these games, and the other team's getting a lot better chances. And I mean, Dylan and I, like, I feel like we kind of have a responsibility to call it how we see it, and, and tell you what we honestly feel about this stuff. And it is fun celebrating wins and all that. But when it comes time for the deep dive, where we really have to evaluate how this team is playing, and we said it earlier this season too, when the results were okay, but we felt bad things coming, just like, look, they're kind of underperforming here. Like they're getting away with it due to good goaltending. I feel like we have to be honest about that. We can say it in the context of celebrating what Joey is doing, but you look at that Pittsburgh game, 4-1 win, nice, easy win. Everyone's talking about how great they played, right? you look at the expected goals in that game, and I know expected goals aren't the be all end all, but they match the eye test. And I think Dylan agrees
Mhm.
with me here. Expected goals were 3.9 to 1.6 for Pittsburgh. The Penguins had much, much better chances in that game. I mean, the Penguins were 75% on the money puck deserved to win meter, everything you looked at, and it matches the eye test. Joey Daccord is the difference in that game. He's the reason it feels like a comfortable win rather than just getting shelled all game and probably losing. Like, he is playing so well, but it is masking a lot of deficiencies with this team. And so it's fun while it lasts. And who knows? I mean, we've seen goaltending runs just go for entire seasons.
Yeah.
I'm not convinced that it won't last, right? Like, I think
Mhm.
Joey can keep this going for an extended stretch. I really think he can do this. But then, you ask, of course, then, like, okay, what does that mean? Like, can they win enough games to get back in it and get in contention? Probably not. But, then, okay, where does the extra points get you? I know now I'm just kind of,
No,
just
no,
talking about a
yeah.
bunch of random stuff. But I don't know. I feel like, hey, Joey Daccord is regularly stealing games again. Like, somebody stop that thief. Joey Daccord's stealing games. Seriously, stop him. He's ruining the tank.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, certainly if you're on that side of the equation, then that is definitely what you're probably saying. But it is true. I mean, there's so many times, and again, this is why we felt like we had to talk about the defense this week, because even though they are winning these games, you look at that Penguins game and those chances that the Penguins had in and around the crease, and it's just it's borderline miraculous that they did not score more than the one goal that they got, right? Which was, again, by the way, how'd they get that goal? Sidney Crosby is left completely alone, like us, just a step in front of Joey Daccord, right?
Yeah, he's right there in the slot, and there's nobody on him, and so no goalie's going to stop that. And especially for a Penguins team that did not have Evgeny Malkin, their second best forward, for most of the game, it says a lot about what they were able to generate. And I know the dogs there for the Sidney Crosby mention. I know you can't mention that name, like, oh, Crosby.
Yes.
You've trained her well.
Yes, no, there's stuff going on, but it's one where, like, this is an issue. Like you said, we kind of have to talk about it. It made sense to talk about it. It has been time, and even while the Kraken have had this short term success this season, we know kind of how things have gone on there for everyone. So I don't know. I'm left looking at it, RJ, when you factor in the forward group and everything. We talked about the eye test and what's not been working. After, it's okay. It's okay. I know it's almost over. We've been talking about that. One of the things that I am left a little confused with is just how all the analytics just don't line up with this team, right? Like they match the eye test, right? Like it's all working there. And I guess maybe I shouldn't be confused, but I am confused because it did feel like the Kraken were one of the teams that had a better handle, at least in years past, on finding those players that excelled analytically, and then being able to get that positive value out of their depth guys and all of that stuff. And this year that just hasn't been the case, kind of across the board. Like, this whole roster has just not been able to kind of get it done on paper or on the ice.
And I think it is a little confusing too when you look at a team that is, so analytics focused, right? They've got a robust analytics department, some very smart people there. And so generally when you see teams, that have kind of dedicated the resources there, I always think of Carolina every year because their, expected goals numbers always look fantastic every year. But the Kraken, you look at their, and Jay Fresh, on Twitter just put out a new batch of these numbers, with data from Top Down Hockey here. And the Kraken are 30th out of 32 teams in, like, 5-on-5 expected goal share. Like, that's not good, but they are better than 30th in the league in the standings. And you kind of look at the numbers that Jay Fresh puts out there, and you kind of break down why. And of course, a big part of that is Joey Daccord. He put out also, goals saved above expected leaders in the NHL. Joey Daccord, the fourth best goalie by that metric here. And so the Kraken are getting, even though Grubauer, I think, is the third worst goalie in the league, they are getting good team goaltending here. And so you can point to that's why they're better than 30th. And then also goals scored above expected. The Kraken have scored 6.2 goals above expected on the offensive side. So they are actually finishing at a better rate than, luck would dictate that they should. And so they're getting lucky in that respect. They're also getting fantastic goaltending. And so I think that's why you're seeing the Kraken a little bit higher in the standings. But you look at the underlying numbers, especially for a team that is so analytics focused, you'd expect to be better. they're bottom 3 in the NHL.
Yeah. It's just it's surprising. Like I said, I'm a little confused by it because that hasn't really been the case for them. It feels like in the past, but also I'm not confused by it. I'm not surprised by it because it really does feel like the eye test matches this, right? And we're not normally so analytics heavy. I feel like this year, especially on my side of things, I've been a lot more focused on the analytics and everything. And that was because I was in some ways hoping that there was something that I wasn't seeing that I could point to and say like, no, this player is doing well actually, or no, they are playing better, or there was going to be some sort of silver lining for the way that the season was going, and there just kind of hasn't been. And it's unfortunate, and I know there's there's plenty of people out there that it's all on paper. What's on the ice matters, right? Like expected goals are fine in theory, but it is just that, it is just theory. The practice is what matters. And look, there's players that back that up, like Vince Dunn, where there's what's supposed to be happening in theory, and then there's a whole lot more happening in practice. But the bottom line is, this year it really feels like up and down this lineup, offensively, defensively, no matter where you're looking, even with Joey, the numbers just kind of parallel exactly what we're seeing, and unfortunately it just hasn't been enough, and it's left a lot of difficult questions for the team to make in this upcoming offseason. As you're going to have to find a roster that works better than this one, because these can all be really good pieces individually, but for whatever reason as a whole they're just not working. And I think the defense is a good example of that. There's plenty of skill and good players on this defensive group, and they just, for whatever reason right now, doesn't seem to matter what order you put them in, who's paired with who, they're just struggling. And that's something that the team is just going to need to figure out.
And I think that's something that I'm trying to maybe prepare people for mentally, especially as we get close to the trade deadline, which is coming up, right? The idea of some of these guys getting moved, whether it's the trade deadline or the off season, and a real shakeup happening. Because I mean, that is one of the impressions I really got from doing the Armchair GM stream with the patrons, and I really appreciate everybody on there. But this was the first time that I really kind of went at it as though, look, nobody's untouchable here. You have to explore everything. All these players have to be on the table because of just the reality of the results you're getting. And I know that was kind of an uncomfortable conversation for a lot of people, but I think for better or worse, this off season, we're kind of there.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just think everybody, with this podcast, I feel like we're always, not to pat ourselves on the back or anything, but I feel like we tend to be kind of a week ahead on certain things, right? Or tend to be ahead of some of the conversation points. I want to make sure that we're ahead on this, just so that fans can kind of be prepared for what it might take to turn things around and be serious about winning.
I think after a second year of this, kind of being out of it by Christmas, I think people know what might be coming down the pike. Whether you're excited for it or not is a very different conversation, but I think people know. And yeah, it's just going to be one we're going to have to kind of wait and see what ends up happening there and what moves are made. And yeah, it sucks when that happens in sports, but it does happen. You can compile a group, and then for whatever one reason or another, it just doesn't come together, and then you've got to make changes. It's just the way things go. It's just unfortunate when it happens, and unfortunately, it happened to the Kraken kind of again after last year, and so it has been a tough one, but that's the way the cookie crumbles, unfortunately. I think, is there anything else you kind of had?
Well, no, I was just gonna say on the brighter side, you know what? They got an NHL team.
You still have the cookie, even though it's in little crumbly pieces.
Yeah, exactly. You know what? They're playing tonight. They're playing each of the next 2 games. We get to watch 2 Kraken games, and win or lose, we always have a fun time with that.
Definitely. So make sure to join us tonight for the live game commentary. I promise it is a lot more fun than us talking about all of the stuff that we talk about on this podcast. A lot of the other stuff we do is a lot more fun. Post games,
much lighter feel. I promise.
Yeah. Again, the deep dive is what it is for that reason. But appreciate everybody listening. Super appreciate the law offices of Rico Tessendor for sponsoring this podcast as they do each and every week. No history lesson this time. We'll just do the straight ad read. But really appreciate Rico for having reached out to us, wanting to be a part of this, wanting to be a part of the deep dive and everything. And again, if you ever need Rico's services, you can visit Rico's website, ricotessendor.com, or you can call 425-778-9800. And as a fellow member of the ECH community, he will help you out. Appreciate everybody for listening, and we will see you all next time.
Hey everyone, before we go, we just wanted to give a quick shout out to all of our awesome patrons over at patreon.com/Emerald City Hockey, especially our Terror of the Deep patrons.
Thank you so much for making all this possible. We really appreciate your support.